Hello, my name is Steve Horvath. I will talk to you today about the surprising and remarkable discovery of biological aging clocks that allow us to measure aging in all organs and tissues. It was a journey that started from the DNA molecule and then went all the way to assessing health. My question is, what is the biological age of this bodybuilder? He's 75 years old. He's more muscular than I am. He's very strong. He's lean. So according to superficial markers of aging, this man is very young. However, according to molecular markers, he is old. And one such molecular marker is the epigenetic clock. So what is epigenetics? Epigenetics relates to chemical modification of the DNA. These chemical changes determine whether the DNA is open or closed, whether genes are turned on or genes are turned off. And I focus on one chemical change known as methylation, DNA methylation. And our DNA molecule has millions of locations where methylation changes with age. Certain parts of the DNA gain methylation with age. Other parts of the DNA lose methylation with age. And one can develop a mathematical algorithm to track these changes, which parts have gained methylation, which parts have lost methylation, and then this mathematical formula is what we call a clock. It measures aging. And the journey started in 2011, when we showed that DNA methylation in saliva allows you to measure the age of a person with an error of plus minus 5 years. We were very proud of this finding, plus minus 5 years. But by now, many years later, we have epigenetic clocks whose error is only 2.5 years. These clocks are very accurate in young people. So what was novel? The novel part of the analysis was to build a predictor of age. A clock is a prediction method that predicts the age of a tissue or an organism. One of the great surprises of epigenetic clocks was that they also measure aging in children and even in fetuses. For example, we found that when you look at the fetal retina, the back of your eye, and you look at fetuses of different ages, the epigenetic clock already can distinguish different ages of the fetus. So one of the surprising insights has been that development is actually linked to aging. In the past, medical researchers distinguished old age, geriatric work, from development, pediatric work. But the insights of epigenetic clocks is that there's a continuity of aging across the entire lifespan. We had a question, which was an ambitious question. Is it possible to build an epigenetic aging clock that measures aging in all mammalian species? One prediction method, one mathematical formula that measures aging in elephants, lions, mice, rats. Is that possible? And to our great surprise, it is possible. In 2023, we developed what we call a universal pan-mammalian clock that measures age in all mammalian species. It's a great surprise because mammalian species diverged hundreds of million years ago. A bat that flies in the sky is very different from a dolphin or a whale in the ocean or from primates. Evolutionary divergence that is several hundred million years old. But we can measure aging with one formula in all these species. And that's exciting because it suggests that certain parts of aging are conserved across all species. And it points to the idea that there's a program of aging. So aging is not just accumulation of damage, but there is a program related to it. And as I mentioned, this program also relates to development. Here I show you how our universal clock applies to humans. It applies to mice, to dolphins, to dogs, elephants, bats. Highly accurate measure of aging in all these different species. But now I want to come to the species we care most about, humans. What do we learn about human aging? And the first thing I want to report to you is that women age slightly more slowly than men. When you analyze the blood of women, it's maybe 2 years younger than the blood of men. But another great surprise were differences in racial groups. So we analyzed different racial groups in the United States. And I was really surprised that Hispanics who live in the US aged more slowly than individuals of European ancestry. Why is that? And I couldn't believe the results, but we've seen that in many studies, Latinos age more slowly. And I thought it must be an error, but then I learned that there is a surprising paradox in the US, which found that Latinos who live in the US live actually 3 years longer than non-Hispanic whites. And it is a paradox because often Latinos don't have the same access to top health care. So if anything, one would expect the opposite to be the case. However, this mortality paradox has been validated and replicated. And my suggestion is that maybe there is an advantage in Latinos that is manifest on the level of epigenetics because our clocks showed the same. Now I want to come to obesity. Everyone knows obesity is not good for you, but I was surprised to learn how obesity increases the epigenetic age of your liver, but also of your blood. And that was true for older people. But a year ago, a very exciting research study came out of Chile from professors who study the so-called Santiago longitudinal study. And they analyzed the blood of young adults, people who are about 30 years old. And they looked at people who were obese ever since childhood. They were obese all their life. And in these young adults, the 30-year-olds, they already observed increased epigenetic age in blood. Now, we know obesity is challenging, but it's so difficult to lose weight. But many of you may have heard of new drugs, semaglutide or drugs known as GLP-1 receptor agonists. These are weight loss drugs. And a recent study showed that people who lost a lot of fat following such semaglutide treatment, that their epigenetic age in blood was also reduced. So what this study suggests is that within 32 weeks of taking semaglutide, the weight loss that is observed also leads to a benefit when it comes to epigenetic age in the blood. Another surprising result is about your body temperature. So there was a very elegant study in mice where certain neurons in the brain were stimulated so that the temperature of the mouse was lowered. Normally, a mouse has a temperature of 35 or 36 degrees Celsius. But when you stimulate the neurons, that temperature goes down to 31 degrees Celsius. And the mice with the cooler body temperature, they aged more slowly. So after 7 or 8 months, their epigenetic age was 80% lower than the mice with the regular body temperature. Let's now come back to humans. What can you do? We showed recently that if you take 1 gram of omega-3 supplements, fish oil, you slow your epigenetic age after taking it for 3 years. So this was a randomized controlled trial in 700 elderly people, average age 75, and we found that omega-3 supplements lowered the epigenetic age. This study also looked at other interventions, high dosage of vitamin D, and we did not see an effect of vitamin D. Now I want to come to drugs in humans. Here is a study where the investigators looked at 51 human interventions, and they asked which interventions has the strongest effect on reducing biologic age in blood or epigenetic age. And the number one treatment was involved people who are HIV positive. So people who have HIV, they get antiretroviral therapy. And this treatment very much lowered the epigenetic age in blood of these people. The second treatment that had a very strong effect is against inflammation. It's called anti-TNF-alpha, against inflammation in people who suffer autoimmune diseases. And that was also associated with reduced biologic age. The third treatment is famous. It's metformin. This is a treatment that diabetics take. And again, this anti-diabetic medication lowered biologic age. And the fourth treatment is less known. It's called hyperbariatric oxygen therapy. Fundamentally, you give oxygen to people, and that also reduced biologic age. And we should talk about oxygen, because one question is, well, what do epigenetic clocks actually measure? And part of it relates to oxygen sensing. So to show that to you, I want to report a study of so-called intermittent hypoxia, disrupted hypoxia. So mice lived in a cage with low oxygen, and after 4 weeks, their biologic age in lungs and other tissues went up. And so it shows that lack of oxygen increases epigenetic age. But then conversely, if you allowed these old mice to recover, they had 4 weeks of normal oxygen, then the biologic age went down. And I mention this to you because many interventions that stress you and that lead to an increase of epigenetic age, they can be reversed. For example, what I showed earlier, if you were obese, your epigenetic age is increased. If you lose weight, your epigenetic age will be decreased. Or if you have HIV and your epigenetic age is increased, well, if you take antiretrovirals, it will be decreased. But conversely, unfortunately, the opposite is also true. Many interventions that rejuvenate you have only a short-term effect. If you stop the intervention, the age goes up again. So we struggle with that rejuvenation is only transient. Yeah, I hope I could show you today how epigenetic clocks can be used in human clinical trials. For example, I showed you omega-3 supplements and various other interventions like metformin. Epigenetic clocks can also be used in research to study which stress factors increase age, like in the mouse study. And our hope is, of course, that epigenetic clocks will one day be useful for clinical applications. I feel we are a couple of years away from realizing this promise to see epigenetic clocks truly helping people to determine what to do about aging. Thank you very much. Thank you. Stay young and beautiful.